great. Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks you to Jimmy Steiner as well for his technical support in setting this up. Also wanted to thank my fellow co-chair, Stefan Kirchner at the ASIL Space Law Interest Group, and our vice chair, Jess Rogers, and our past co-chair, Elsbeth Magilton, who helped kick off this World Speak Space series. Today we focus on Latin America. We're delighted to have the ASIL's Latin America Interest Group co-sponsor this, and also co-sponsorship by Avila Space Law Committee and the Nebraska Space Cyber Telecom program. We have a tremendous panel lined up today for you. João Paulo Campos is president of Viziona, Brazil's satellite company. He's been with them for a number of years, and prior to that, in a number of positions with Embraer, which is part of the joint venture creating Viziona. João will tell us more about. We have Carlos Bello, the founding partner of Bello, Gallardo, Baraqui, and Garcia. 22 years of experience in the areas of telecom, broadcasting, media, space law, international negotiations. He leads the telecom media technology practice group at the Gallardo firm. Jennifer Manor is the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at EchoStar Corp. Hughes Network Systems. She's responsible for the company's domestic and international regulatory and policy issues, including spectrum and allocation and market access issues. Jennifer previously served in a number of key positions with the Federal Communications Commission, including being senior counsel to FCC Commissioner. Ana Cristina Gallo Rosa is legal advisor to the Brazilian delegation at the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UN COPUOS for short. She's also an entrepreneur, helping found Dipteran, a company that's specializing in using space technologies and space technology applications to detect mosquito diseases. And then we have Maureen Williams, who is Senior Research Officer of Space Law at CONICET, University of Buenos Aires, the National Scientific Council of Argentina. She is also the permanent ILA, International Law Association representative to the UN COPUOS, director of the IISL, International Institute of Space Law, and also a specialized arbitrator at the UN Permanent Court of Arbitration. So again, we have an amazing panel here for you. And we're going to go through a series of questions, and then we'll open up the floor to the audience. João, we'll start with you. Can you describe how Viziona came about through a joint venture of Embraer and Telebras, as well as talk a bit about Viziona's recent cooperation with the Brazilian Space Agency?
Okay. Well, the creation of Viziona, I mean, it's something that is being desired by the government for more than a decade, I would say. If you take decade-old policy documents from the Brazilian Science Ministry, that has always been the need identified there and clearly shown for a company that would work as satellite integrator in Brazil. Making a parallel, they felt that the sector in Brazil had a very strong technical capabilities, but was mostly built on research institutes, and there was a need, a sort of Embraer of the satellites. Yeah. So you would see that in several policy documents. When the government decided to launch the SCGDC satellite, the geosatellite for defense and communications from the Brazilian government, that was opportunity to build that entity, that company. And then that was the root of the creation of Viziona. So Embraer was invited to put together the company with Telebras, and then it was the birth was like this. You know, we were responsible for the GEO satellite. This satellite was very important for the government policy goals. It has an important role into the national broadband expansion plan. It also would hold military communications. But there was a third component, which was a technology absorption program. This was the foundation for the creation of our technical capabilities beyond what we have inherited from what was there from INPE. So we were, let's say, entitled of this, to take part of this program. And along that, there was also a transfer technology program to the other companies around the space supply chain in Brazil. So this was the inception of Viziona, the very beginning, about 10 years ago. From there, we have been working on our own technology. We have created a very strong space-based services, communications, remote sensing. We are a strong player in Brazil, promoting these technologies, promoting satellite applications in the country. And we have also been working on satellite, what we call VCUP. It's the first microsatellite designed by a Brazilian company in history. So what is the agreement that we have with the space agency? It doesn't relate to any of those things that I mentioned to you. The agency was very important in the beginning with the technology absorption program. But what we're trying to do with the agency is that the Brazilian Space Agency is very concerned about designing solutions that solve concrete problems from the society. They believe the space must be brought down to Earth to solve normal people daily problems, just like what Ana Cristina is trying to do with the mosquito monitoring software. And so the idea is that we would bring the experience that we have acquired by providing space-based services to the Brazilian society into the new missions designed by the Brazilian Space Agency. So that's the goal of that last agreement.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about the multiple missions and purposes, and those are continuing to expand, as well as a number of firsts that you've been involved in. Another question, Joel, for you. Brazilian government signed a space technology safeguards agreement with the United States with the hopes to further revive its space sector, including the launch sector. The idea, I guess, is that Brazil would be able to claim some share of the space launch market business by allowing companies to launch from the Brazilian Air Force Alcântara Launch Center. What are the prospects for this in the near to medium term? You talked about the satellite business. What about the launch side of things?
Well, that's a great initiative. We have one of the best spots for satellite launches in the world. I'm very enthusiastic about the idea of seeing the Alcântara blaze being actually used in commercial activities. I believe that is going to be transformational for the region. It's going to have also a great impact on the space program too, not only because of the monies that will bring and generate, but mainly because I believe it's going to be a success, and success breeds success, and we need more success cases in Brazil's space program. So very enthusiastic about this. I mean, concerning the time frame for the establishment of the service, well, anyone that has already been involved in the launch, the satellite launch, knows the complexity that's involved in that. Yeah? Even if you go, our satellite was launched out of Kourou, and even being one of the prime centers in the world, you see the complexity of the things. So I think that there is a few things to do, or some steps to do. Things like we need a space law to regulate the launch. We need a established licensing procedure, and of course the ones that is going to do this first are going to take a bit of the burden of helping organizing the whole things, right? When think about infrastructure, we've got to think about not only the base and the launch, but even hospitality. I mean, a launch is an event will bring lots of people from abroad, being customers or technicians from the operators. All these things has to be worked out. Fiscal issues, right? That must be some sort of exempted area in the base to allow for the import and export of the goods, customs, and all this stuff. So this is gonna take some time to be completely ironed out. The good news is that, I mean, the job that the Air Force and the Brazilian Space Agency has been doing so far has been outstanding. Brazil is a very complex country in a sense of in terms of procedures and all the bureaucracy in this sort of issues. And I'm seeing a level of cooperation and efficacy in the initiative that I've rarely seen in past actions from Brazil's space program. So there is really an alignment in making the base work. So given this level of interest from the government, engagement of all the entities, I think that's possible, might be possible to see a launch in a 2 years time frame and something like this, especially if you consider that some of the players that the companies that have been authorized to operate out of the base, they doesn't require much infrastructure. So it's just a matter of ironing out all these issues that I mentioned. And as I said, given the engagement, the coordination that I'm seeing here, I think that this can be done pretty soon.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the points on the need for the hospitality infrastructure and the legal infrastructure in addition to the launch infrastructure there, and of course the technical safeguards agreement is because export of the satellite is export controlled. To get your satellite to a foreign launch site, you got to deal with U.S. export control laws. And we'll try and have a session actually on that at some point here over the next year, export control laws. But final question for you, Joao, in this opening round of questions. So there's been some press reports recently. Nicaragua and Costa Rica have established space agencies in the past year, but there's this proposal that's also been reported on to maybe create a regional space agency, a Latin American space agency. And just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and as well as if you know of Brazil's view with regard to establishment of a regional space agency.
Okay. Well, I'm not taking part of the effort myself, so I can only offer you my view on this issue. We've been working on remote sensing services and telecommunication services based on space for some time now. And for us, it's clear that the region needs space-based products. It's clear that space has a role in the region, given the current level of all the environmental issues, the security issues, the need for better planning, better cartography, communications, and such. So there is the need. Yeah? There is also the interest from the countries to develop their own technologies. We've seen that from Paraguay to Venezuela. I mean, many countries are trying to accelerate the programs. Many countries in the world have purchased their first satellites, have designed their own satellites, and there is a growing interest in this area. Conversely, I see that currently there is very little integration between the countries. Right? So, what are the common needs? What are the industry potential synergies? What are are there any coordinated initiatives already between the countries? I don't see many of those. So, given that the countries, they have very different stages in terms of organization, developing funding, technology in the area, I think that going straight for a regional agency may be one step too large, a step too large. I mean, I think that first you need to start cooperation initiatives between the countries, find the synergies, and then as a second step, I think that a regional agency just like ESA might be a good solution. But first, you need to date, and then you marry. I mean, I think trying to establish the agency up front is taking one step too far.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, let's turn to Jennifer and Carlos for our next series of questions here. And Jennifer, let me start with you. Your company is obviously active in providing services in Latin America, EchoStar and Hughes. What are some of the complications, difficulties, or hurdles, if any, in providing satellite communication services in Latin America? And what has EchoStar's Hughes experience been?
So thank you. I have a long experience in Latin America. And I'd say we're generally able to get over those obstacles, though I think it's often time consuming. So probably if I was to name the number one issue, but I have more than this because I wouldn't want to disappoint you, it's that some countries have a lack of blanket licensing. And that's very important for our VSATs, which are our user terminals. And that's that a number of countries, and Brazil's changed the rules recently, and we're very thankful. But other countries still haven't. There are some countries who have changed the rules, but essentially, because we deploy for broadband a large number of identical terminal devices throughout a country, the most efficient way to license it is to charge us one fee and give us the authority to deploy all the terminals like you do with the cellular network, though these are fixed. Some countries still have antiquated rules, in my view, that require you to actually put in each site and to pay individual fees, quite high fees. We've seen that in a number of countries, just going on, not just the blanket licensing, but fees. We see a number of countries who are still charging very high per terminal fees. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, those get passed on to the consumer. So when we're trying to be competitive and trying to bring consumers, affordable services, that of course the government fees do have to be passed on, and that raises that rate. That we've been able to work with a number of countries to address that, but there's still a number of markets and a number of regulators where some more work needs to be done on that. Similarly, one of the things that I was really surprised about when we started to seek access for our broadband satellites was the number of regulators who had made the spectrum available, even though it was allocated at the ITU for fixed satellite service, hadn't actually put that into domestic rules. And that's quite concerning, because that is it wasn't necessarily that anyone was opposed, it was just something that hadn't gotten done. And so that at times could take over a year or more to happen, which delays our ability to get service, because we can't, of course, apply for a license until we have that. And then I'd put number 3, we are still seeing in some markets what I'd call protectionist behavior. There are some markets where there are government-owned satellite systems or large incumbents. And, I was responsible back in the 90s in having the US take Mexico to the WTO on behalf of some of the US carriers, because we couldn't get into that market. It's not as extreme as that, but we are still seeing favoritism. And that's not that people won't accept licenses, it's that we have licenses pending, for years essentially with no real action. And, you can't point to anything, but I would say the lack of understanding that having competition is really important, especially when you're trying to get out to these rural areas where perhaps incumbent providers may not be able to reach for economic or other reasons. So those would say are the 3 major challenges.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The last one you mentioned with the old WTO telecoms agreement, but didn't take care of everything on the ground. Well, Carlos, let's turn to you. You obviously have your firm in Mexico, but practice throughout the region. Are there a lot of differences among countries in Latin America in terms of their regulatory structures for satellite communications, and maybe more details on Mexico's regulatory system for satellite communications?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you to the American Society of International Law for this opportunity. You know, it's nice to be with such great panelists in the same place. So, well, to respond to your question, in Latin America, the needs of countries for satellite services are very different. You know, you have Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Peru. You know, they do have a need for satellite services because the geography just makes it difficult to reach some places with cable. No? So satellite is probably the best solution. And some other countries, for example, Uruguay, which is perfectly, you know, connected, they probably don't need that much satellite. Or probably in the Caribbean, some smaller countries may not have the need for satellites. But the regulation and the importance that the authorities give to satellite regulation is different. In principle, it is the same for all countries. You know, in most countries, you need landing rights or some kind of registry. You know, you need to say, okay, my satellite covers your country. I'm going to use it commercially in your country. Some countries may have a more specific license for that with a specific process. And some other countries may just say, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. Just put your name in this registry and we'll be fine. No? Of course, for satellite companies, that's what is desired. Some countries may charge you for using the spectrum on their territory. Some others may not. And to provide services to the user, to the end user, most of the countries will ask for a license. So the principle is the same. The differences are what type of license you need, if you need to pay, if you need to put a gateway or not, how long does it take for the country to give you the license? You know, that has gotten better. You know, many years ago, it could take you 3 to 4 years to get a license. I think we've gone past that in most of the countries, no? And to be specific, in Mexico, Mexico is undergoing a change of the whole satellite regulation, which it's very good. There was a public consultation made by the regulator. It's closed now, and they're working on the final draft of what's going to come out, which we hope it's more relaxed, it's more open to competition, and makes it easier to face those challenges that Jennifer talked about. But I think understanding the main concept will let you understand the regulation in every single country. No? So it is similar in short.
Great, thank you very much. So it's at least encouraging. There's a slow march towards further liberalization, but just like in a lot of sectors, it takes time. Well, let's turn to the international side of things. The International Telecommunications Union, one of the oldest international organizations, a UN specialized agency, holds a World Radio Conference every 4 years, roughly. And the Inter-American Telecommunications Commission, an entity of the Organization of American States, also referred to as CITEL, tries to coordinate positions in advance. And Jennifer, can you describe how CITEL operates in preparation for the ITU World Radio Conferences?
Sure, but Matthew, maybe it makes more sense for Carlos to talk about that a little bit, and then I can talk about the issues. Carlos,
yes.
do that?
That's right. Question to Carlos, and then we'll go to you for some of the issues they're coordinating on. Thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. Yes, CITEL, in the ITU, I think since the WRC 2000, regional positions started to be important. Before you had many documents from every single country, and Europe started this unification of the earth for logical reasons. And now, if you go to WRC, most of the proposals are already organized by or agreed by region. So it's important to work on the region. In our case, in the Americas, it's CITEL. So the way it works is CITEL has a working group to prepare the WRC. And that working group has different sections sub-working groups. And also there is a rapporteur for each agenda item. So I think it's very well organized, and I believe it's the most important group in CITEL's PCC2, the Permanent Committee 2 for radio communications. So in practice, the way you would do it, if you're a company, no, you would take your position to your country's committee, to discuss, to see if it's acceptable for the country to take that position, and then you would take that to the next level. In some countries, the next level may be a sub-regional organization in Central America or in the Caribbean, or in South America, the Andean group. And then you go to CITEL. In CITEL, of course, you do all the explanation of the proposal. The country will do it, and it will be accepted or rejected or modified or whatever. And after lots of work, you have a common proposal. There are some rules in CITEL to say, okay, in order to be a CITEL proposal, it needs a minimum of X administrations to join, blah, blah, blah. And then once there is a position, every regional organization takes that to the WRC, to the World Radio Communications Conference. And that's where it gets discussed. And I think it's much easier at a worldwide level to discuss only by regions. I mean, that helps to have lots of work in the 4 weeks. The ITU, the WRCs many years ago used to be 3 months long. I don't think a lot of people will be capable of having 3 months in a WRC. You either get divorced or you get tired, but so regional work has really improved efficiency, and it really helps a lot. So that would be the way to go ahead with a proposal from your country. Huh?
That's great. That's a tremendous explanation of the process, and really an interesting way diplomacy is conducted in the area. Well, Jennifer, let's turn to you. What are going to be the key issues for CITEL to try and agree to internally, and to help promote externally to the full ITU at the WRC 23?
So every WRC, thank you again. The previous WRC votes for a final agenda for the upcoming meeting. So we have our work 23 agenda. I still don't know what year it is. I'm still recovering from the last work, as Carlos and I spent a very long time in Egypt. So I'd say probably the number one issue for most governments is additional spectrum for 5G. And that's two sides. One is, of course, everyone wants more spectrum because there's such incredible user demand. But you've got the other side of the coin where it's going to impact some incumbent services. And so, or perhaps other new services. So I'll give you a good example. One of the bands that's being looked at is in the 6.7 gigahertz band. That band is being looked to for Wi-Fi as an important band for them for unlicensed use or license exempt use. The 5G folks wanted, and actually GSMA came out with a press release saying that this is an incredibly important band for us. And then you've got us, the satellite folks, who have our feeder links in that band. So systems like we have a NGSO system we're launching, but Sirius XM, Global Star, and others, Omnispace, all use that band for feeder links for non-geostationary orbit satellite systems and for geos for the case of Sirius XM. But that's just one of many bands. That's an incredibly important issue. I think there's one sleeper issue that I want to bring up. And at the end of the last conference, the last week, the United Arab Emirates came up with a study question, which is in a portion of the agenda where you're not supposed to take regulatory action. But of course, the conference can always choose otherwise. The conference can do what the conference wants to do. And that is a study to look at all the bands for IMT for fixed service that the fixed service operates in. And so that's got a lot of people questioning what the purpose of the agenda item was. I couldn't tell you. I still haven't figured out. It's been almost 2 years. But there is some work going on that. So that's kind of the one I'd say everyone's a little skeptical about, and it didn't originate in our region. So I think CTEL is somewhat aligned on how to treat that. And then I just put forward that there's a couple of very important satellite issues. Though both of those, of course, impact the satellite industry as well. One is flexibility for NGSOs to operate ESOMs, or stations in motion. So providing service on planes, ships, vehicles, that sort of thing. There's also, and this is my favorite agenda item, I guess I have two agenda items that are looking at more spectrum for satellites. And I think that's always very important. One is in the 17.3 to 17.7 gigahertz band. That's a band that today is shared with direct-to-home television, but because of for gateways for those systems, but the fixed satellite service believes it can share. And so that's an important one. And a number of countries, including the US, Canada, I believe Mexico, and some other countries are already looking at making that band available for the fixed satellite service. So that's one where I think we will get a CTEL position fairly easily. And then the other item is additional spectrum for mobile satellite service. It's a group I'm chairing internationally. That's a lot more controversial because that's one where the incumbent services are arguing, at least in some of the bands, that they would have trouble sharing. So that kind of gives you an idea, but there's I think 19 or 23 agenda items. So I could speak all day on this. Hopefully that gives you a taste.
No, that's great. And you can kind of see some issues where countries are all moving already in alignment. A CTEL position's easier than maybe where something's novel and might challenge some incumbents in some countries. So
yeah, and so Matt, I just want to clarify one thing too. There's really two ways to look at this too, because you've got the prep process coming up. CTEL doesn't until the last meeting before the WRC, which is usually 2-3, I think about 3 months in advance, decide what it's going to do at the conference. But we are putting in preliminary views already. And in some cases, countries are working together in the study groups. Though I do have to say, I really don't like doing this virtually. I think we are incredibly handicapped. I think all the regions are handicapped. So I'm not saying CTEL is worse. And CTEL is a very special body in that I think we have incredible relationships. And because of that, a number of the issues are resolved not in the meeting room. So being virtual is even harder, I think, for us than perhaps in the less cohesive regions might be a good way to put it. So I just wanted to add that. So I know the ITU is swearing that the WRC is going to be held in 2023. I'm still skeptical, especially if, right now they've moved any in-person meetings till 2022. I just don't know how you do this, basically in a year and a half. So.
Appreciate that. It's an issue all international negotiators and international organizations are dealing with, but in this context, especially an issue. Well, final question for Carlos and Jennifer before we move to you and copious issues with Anna, Christina, and Maureen. What are the needs and prospects in the region for universal service, and what role do you see for satellites in advancing universal service in the Latin America region, and also what are your thoughts on role of satellite for Internet of Things in the region? Carlos, we can start with you, and then we'll get Jennifer's thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Well, universal service is the key issue in every single country, no? And Latin America is no exception. Every authority is trying to get coverage for everybody in every corner of every country. So, as I mentioned before, some countries may be in better position than others to cover with fixed links, with cable, but also many of the countries do really need satellite. I mean, satellite plays a key role in universal service because it's the easiest way to access remote areas. Just go put the antenna and you have connection. And Mexico started its satellite program because of that. It was, and Mexico has its own government satellites because they need coverage. What they do is they go to very remote areas. They install a VSAT, the antenna. You have connectivity, and from that point they put a hotspot, for people to connect on a terrestrial network. And it has worked pretty good. There are very small villages that have the antenna, and people get close to wherever the antenna is, which is probably a central park or the local store or whatever. And that has been working out not only for government programs, but also for private companies. Private companies such as Hughes and Nexstar have started providing that type of service, rural service, in which you go contact the local store, they have the antenna, and they sell the airtime for people with their mobiles to connect to the Wi-Fi. So it's been working, and it really helps developing universal service. I'll let the IoT to Jennifer, because she's expert on that issue, and I'm sure she'll have something to say on that. Thank you.
That's great. Jennifer, thoughts on universal service, role of satellite, and the role of satellite in the Internet of Things in the region?
Yeah, I do want to talk quite honestly, and I'm not talking just about broadband, but kind of bringing 5G, which is everyone's focus. So I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that satellite does provide a very, very solid, reliable service at high speeds. Today, there are speeds out there that are 120 available in the marketplace. We're putting up a satellite next year that will reach those speeds, including in Latin America. You have Starlink. I'm not exactly sure what speeds they're claiming. And for GSOs, you do have some latency issues that you don't have with NGSOs, but to be honest, almost all traffic that people rely on in their day-to-day world is not latency sensitive, unless you're a really big video gamer. But you have that choice. So I think satellites are, and we're actually involved in 3GPP right now and ensuring that we're part of the standards for 5G. So I think that's a really important part of this, because what Carlos said is there's just going to be some parts of Latin America that you're just not going to get fiber, and you're not going to get fixed wireless, and whether it's geographic or economic. So I think one of the concerns I have is, as governments start looking at deployment, are they looking for unrealistic performance expectations, hence that they exclude satellite, whether it's geo or non-geo, and then end up with a less cost efficient service. But I fully support Carlos on his concept on the community Wi-Fi. We're a provider. We partner with governments and with Facebook and others, and we found it to be incredibly successful. And we compete against ourselves. We don't put it in villages where we don't have service. We have service, but it's kind of like, I think of it like the old calling cards. It's kind of a gateway drug, I'd call it. Is, once you start to use it and like it and see the value, and maybe you start a business, your children are going to school, hopefully you'll progress to a subscription, even if it's a lower cost service. So I think it's a benefit for everyone. On IoT and machine to machine, this is where I do think satellite's incredibly important. We have a S-band, we have an MSS service in the S-band, as does over Mexico, and we're putting up an NGSO system. There's other companies that are doing the same. There's L-band, there's lots of frequency bands. And even the broadband satellites can do IoT. But I think that's one of the areas where satellites excel because of our broad ubiquitous coverage. And especially when you're talking for MSS, when you're talking about low data rates, these aren't things that are, they're not surfing the web, right? They're not downloading videos, right? They're doing whatever they're doing. And a lot of the information, depending whether you want to use a geo or a non-GSO, is it latency sensitive? A lot of it's not latency sensitive. Some of it is. So you've got these different approaches, but I think it's one area where satellite is extremely well situated because, as Carlos said, with universal service, we're there. So I think if you talk any of the satellite operators, and if you look at anyone's presentations and any of the panels, That will be one of the important use cases. So it'll be direct to consumer, so really universal service type connectivity, and then machine to machine, among others like backhaul and so forth. But I do put it up there as one of the more important services, especially for the MSS satellite systems.
Great, thank you so much. And we'll move to Anna Cristina and Maureen to talk about the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and Latin American countries' role and views within the COPIUS. Anna Cristina, let's start with you. How do Latin American countries cooperate or coordinate on issues being discussed within the UN COPIUS?
Matheus, first of all, thank you for the invitation. The American Society is a pleasure and an honor to be here in this panel with so distinct panelists. Thank you very much. So I am now together with Mr. Mauro Millions to talk a little about the UN COPUS, the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. From the last 10 years, I have been participate in this the sessions of the UN COPUS, as well as I worked in the UNOSA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs. First of all, I worked before in the office, and then I integrate the delegation. So I have the two views of all these discussions. Now, so first of all, to explain to the audience that the UN COPUS, the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, is a forum for discussions coordinated by the UNOSA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, that has the role as a secretary. So all these countries which are members, they come together to discuss, and the final to have an agreement to produce some political or regulations in the space sector. Need a consensus, need to be for the total of this group of delegates. So it's a very hard as well to achieve this. So now what was the view for me in the Latin American countries of this the behavior in this scenario? First of all, I needed to tell the Brazil. Brazil was one of the first members of this committee, which was created in 1959 at the beginning of the war, the Cold War, when it became the SUS, the countries together. Some countries come together to try to solve political problems. And then it started this forum. So Brazil was one of the first members. Also, Argentina was at the beginning together some Latin countries, and most of the Latin American countries they did a lot of contributions during these years, and as well had important roles. Like one example, Brazil, for more than 20 years, leading the working group of definition and delimitation of outer space. And another countries like, I can just give an example how the Latin American, they are the roles in this committee. So Chile, always with a lot of contributions, Mexico, Argentina, but how now to say how they coordinate and cooperate together is something that these questions is a lot of diplomacy, a political decisions together. I cannot just from my view, say because all the time when they need to achieve an agreement or to cooperate together, there is also the geopolitical issues together to think about this for the results. But there is in this committee for the last years, since the beginning, there is a group of Latin American and Caribbean countries. They most of the time when they have the common views, no, they support. So this group come together. Brazil, if Brazil is in the same view of this group, and another Latin American countries in the Caribbean want to support the consensus in this committee. In this committee, they come together, né, to have more strong voice to try to achieve an agreement, né, or the vote to make more to have more votes, né? But again, it's very hard because the committee works in consensus, né? But most of the time, for Latin American countries, they try to reach the works to try to reach the consensus in this committee, né? I think. Well, just to summarize, that Latin American countries and Caribbean, they have important roles, and Brazil as well, with a lot of contributions, traditional contributions that I already mentioned for definition, the delimitation of outer space. And we had already a chair, Brazilian chair, in the last year. André Hippel was leading the committee on the peaceful use of outer space, the plenary, because this committee, we have the technical subcommittee and the legal subcommittee. And after these two committees, there is a general plenary to take the final decisions for both these two committees, and then come the final decision for to have some decisions, political or regulations. So that I can tell a little about the Latin American countries and Caribbean, and then the contributions. Sorry, the time is so short to have a more explanation, or I just took some examples from Brazil. I believe Professor Maureen Williams can give us a lot of more information and examples. She's is in a traditional member from the ILA. She's always participated for years in this committee. Yeah? So
thank you, Ana Cristina. No, that's great, both on how the UN COPIUS works with its subcommittees, as well as the Brazilian involvement and participation, as well as cooperation amongst Latin American countries. Well, Maureen, let's turn to you. As Ana Cristina mentioned, you're the permanent International Law Association representative to the UN COPIUS. There's a couple major issues that UN COPIUS has been involved in discussions over the years: space debris, and more recently, property rights. And I wanted to get your thoughts on Latin American country views on those two major issues in UN COPIUS discussions: space debris and property rights.
Thank you very much, Mad. Thank you for inviting me to sit at your table. It was very nice to listen to you and to Jennifer and Christina and Joao and Carlos. And the memories brought up on cooperation of the ILA with Brazil on very sometimes intricate problems. One was space debris. Space debris was for a long time, and still is, in corpus. In 1994, it adopted. I was in charge of drafting this draft committee of space debris with a much longer name, and now we're going to revise it and shorten the name and all that. And regularly at every conference, we were revising the consistency of that convention introduced to COPUOS to see how compatible it was with the current international advances. We've done that 2 years. The last one was Australia, 28. Now thinking of revising the convention of 1992 because obviously all of us were pointing at gaps of the Space Law Treaty on many issues. One was especially space debris, and we're still not very happy because we have the guidelines of the scientific and legal and technical subcommittee of the legal subcommittee of COPUOS, who drew up guidelines on space debris in 2007. These guidelines were adopted by everybody, but were very practical, and they were written from the point of view of the scientists, from the scientific and technical subcommittee, but not a word from the legal committee. And that is already a question of mixed feelings. We would like, and the draft convention was supported by many delegations in COPUOS, even recently, especially the Eastern the Czech Republic nations and others, and Brazil was a real champion next to us on this, because that convention had a definition of space debris, not exhausted. You cannot be exhausted in a definition. There's always something else to add, but still, it defined few very topical examples. And also, it covered dispute settlement, it covered the spaces where space debris was most dangerous. And well, now we are at the stage of revising that initial convention to make it more consistent with the present scenarios. Argentina was very much for this too. Curiously, I am somehow liaised to Argentina because at the time I live here, I taught here, and I'm now having a doctoral student from Mexico now to come in and defend the thesis precisely on space debris. And I was requested by the Spanish Institute of Aerospace Law in April to give the group of members, and the group of members consists of most of the Latin American countries, and also Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, because they wanted further developments on space debris and other issues like space resources, of course. And well, then we're going to come up to that later on. But now in the summer, in the legal subcommittee meeting next June, the first half of June, there's precisely a rehearsal tomorrow with moderators. Moderators are one from Poland and another from Australia, whom you possibly know well, and that is Stephen Freeland, to very informally answer questions on these issues. It could be, of course, how it happens now. It's a hybrid meeting, and they use to preserve consensus, they use the silence method. In other words, decisions are adopted if there is silence and if nobody is against the decision question. I think that the 5 minutes have gone through. I don't know if you would like to add anything else about this. I wanted to.
Let's turn to Ana Cristina for quick thoughts on property rights from the Brazilian perspective, and then let's go back to Maureen just on the Latin American view more generally, or Argentina's view on property rights. So space property rights. Ana Cristina, let's have you discuss Brazil's view on those within COPUOS, and then we'll turn back to Maureen.
So, excuse me, can you please repeat?
Yes, we're going to turn to the issue of space property rights, and just wanted to get your thoughts on Brazil's position within UN COPUOS on space property rights.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, the U.S. has had a long-standing interpretation going all the way back to the 70s with testimony by Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and then State Department Legal Advisor Owen, that you can have property rights in extracted resources and that this does not violate OST's Article 2 command. This has now been enshrined in U.S. law as of 2015 with the passage of a congressional act. Your thoughts as well as Brazil's views on that, and then we'll turn to Maureen for Argentina's views or more general Latin American views on that.
Oh, thank you for the question. This is a very delicate issue. So, as I cannot I cannot say on behalf of Brazil. See, I can give you my personal view about this, but as Brazil has fallen the discussions. Okay, about this. I can give you a very diplomatic answer about this. And they are following, they are attent of this. Of course, we have in the Outer Space Treaty, the Article 2, the principle of non-appropriation. And this is a very strong principle that leads a lot of countries against this appropriation of the appropriation in terms of in general view for the property rights for the space resource. So what I can tell you that the view of the Brazil wants to reach the consensus of this issue, you know, for these questions. Of course. Brazil has also is part of the Outer Space Treaty. So, as part of the Space Treaty, as the Article 2 has this strong principle of non-appropriation. So, there is also the respect of in this Outer Space Treaty, the principles. But in summary, I can just give you a very diplomatic answer that Brazil has followed the discussions and wants to reach the consensus. These questions are this issue about the property and space resource has a new item now, a new item starting 2016 in the legal as a single item in the legal subcommittee. So so 2006, 2017, 18, 19 is still, even though 3 years, but very, very new. Yes, to a lot of discussions have started, but it's too early to give a position, as now a lot of countries also are building positions, because now more civil society is participating in this forum, also give more information about this. As I can give you an example of the REG International Space Resource Working Group. As we have the vice president is a Brazilian, Professor Olavo Bittencourt. So we have this civil society is also now has a lot of activity in this forum to try to bring to the delegate the importance of this regulation about this for the property rights or not commercialization. So, so that is something that for me from Brazil, what I can tell you when I'm a diplomat, say that Brazil has followed the discussions and try to reach the consensus. So this is the position of Brazil. So I can.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And it is true. It's a very sensitive issue. And Maureen, final question to you, and I'll just remind the audience, if you have questions for the panel, please go ahead and put them in the question and answer box. This is the last formal question of the session before we turn to audience Q&A and wrap up. But Maureen, final question to you, and maybe I'll tie the property rights question into the Artemis Accords question, because U.S. obviously has launched an Artemis program to put first woman as well as another man on the moon. It has reached out for international partners. There's approximately 7 countries that have signed Artemis Accord agreements with the United States. And a lot of what's in the Artemis Accords is really a restatement of what's in the Outer Space Treaty. There is some modest additions putting flesh on those OST bones. And of course, the property rights issue is one of the issues that's flagged there. So your thoughts, Maureen, on Latin American country reactions to the Artemis Accords, including the space property rights issue within there.
Yeah. Shall I speak now, man? Concerning the kind of footnote to what Anna Cristina was saying, I remember discussing with the head of the Brazilian Professor Gonçalves, who was in charge of delimitation, demarcation of outer space. He and I were discussing for days on end the question of rights with a French delegate, Professor Keres, who was a very nationalistic position professor. It went on and on and on. In general, the principle of non-appropriation is really sacred for Latin American countries. They defend it tremendously. Now that we have the Artemis Accords, they are rather worried because, and I must say that Argentina is also very champion of the non-appropriation principle. Most Latin Americans are happy about the fact that the Artemis Accords constantly make reference to the importance and the preeminence of a principle of non-appropriation above any other national or international law that the signatories of the accords or the space agencies might invoke. The thing is, and now I'm going to refer to the International Institute of Space Law, which is really integrated by groups of Latin America European country, it has very good section. And when there's a question of a kind, like the property, they used to make tea. In the 60 years of life of the International Institute, there's been 3. The latest has to do with the US national law of November 2015, which worried the members of International Law Association and International Institute that said, here we need a statement. Why is the US by a national law allowing its citizens to extract resources and so on? But really, quite apart from that, the American national law says all this without forgetting the respect for international obligations we have already signed for, i.e. the 1967 Treaty, the Principle of Non-Appropriation, which says nothing about the property of natural resources. There's a gap which now Artemis Accords are trying more or less to come to terms with. And that is one of the concerns about the Artemis Accords. But the International Institute of Space said without doubt that the US national law of 2015 was still acceptable in that it clearly stated that that national law would not overturn or disrespect what the 1967 Space Treaty is seeing. And there's 2 more other statements from the Institute which were stated at Corpus at the time on property rights, saying, and this is based in Professor Bintang, one of the pioneers in space law for many years. If the space law does not use the word sovereignty, only to reject sovereignty, then there's no sovereign authority and give the status of property to others. It's incompatible. There's a principle of non-appropriation. There's no sovereignty there. There's no authority. Sovereign authority need property rights to any institution, private or not, to nobody. It would be impossibility. So the law of 2015 was by consensus of many, and many of the UN accept and not criticized as it happened at the very beginning. But still now, and I'm concerned because part 12 of the Artemis Accords speak of space resources, and they very carefully don't get involved in using the word exploitation, as the Outer Space Treaty did not. They don't use it. They use exploration or use or utilization or extraction. Nothing about commercial activities at all. And that perhaps will be in the long run the problem with states' practice regarding Section 12 of the Artemis Accord. They are speaking of those delegations that the US is expecting to take to the moon in 2024 to live there for long spells and work and investigate and extract, they may use the resources. But this, it says very clearly, does not mean going against the principle of non-appropriation laid down in 1967 by the Outer Space Treaty. Let us see when we get more space practice what's going to happen. Perhaps sometimes it's easy to distinguish up to where an activity is or not national appropriation. For example, astronauts may take stones from the moon and keep them at home, and that's fine. But if they put those stones in the market and make money out of that, well, then there would be a problem. This is an open question, which I'm sure we shall have to confront in the months and in the years to come. Normally, the Latin American group looks with a lot of favor to perseverance and ingenuity and all that. And they would love to be part of those exploration activities. But I don't think Latin American countries for the time being would think of becoming signatories to the Artemis agreement. That would take part. They would like to be part of that delegation of many astronauts in 2024 working on the moon, sharing everyday life on the moon, going to school on the moon, and the meals on the moon. Now, some of the countries interested in food industry are looking at this activity as something rather catchy for years to come. For example, in Argentina has a bilateral agreement on space activities, which is disaster management. And it's a bilateral agreement between Italy and Argentina. Each one has 2 installations, and they're working very smoothly for the last 4 years. And now that we hear about the astronauts being on the moon, the Italian ambassador was an ambassador in Argentina because he did very recently a very important food chain of Italian fresh pasta. This is a bit of a joke, but it might happen. He's thinking of having a team trained by NASA, obviously, but Italy is a signatory of the Artemis Accord, trained to following. For example, one of the astronauts who was locking up in the International Space Station this year, and we were all fascinated at the perfection of this astronaut. He was experimenting with some vegetables recently. So now they pull on the leg of the Italian, but it could happen. He thinks, why not train or get NASA to train a group of us to produce some sort of attractive fresh pasta for all this group on the moon, instead of the horrible chemical things they are made to have the moon.
Great. Well,
That was just an anecdote, but it has a basis of truth.
thank you, Maureen. We will leave it there. But yes, I think the incentives for astronauts to be included in Artemis Accords is some of driving it. And I should just say the U.S. law underwent a number of changes before it became final law. One, it really doesn't even mention property rights in the law. It lists a whole bunch of sticks in the property bundle: use, sell, etc. And it also does, I think the Congress did something good to eliminate some of the diplomatic controversy by including in a statement that they were not thereby declaring sovereignty over the moon or any other celestial body. But let's turn to an audience question, and then we'll go to final.
Excuse me, I just want to give information, sorry, also to complement a contribution of Brazil as well in the Artemis. I think the news was also published that Brazil signed to be in the Artemis, and with a contribution to build a rover in this Artemis program. So Brazil, the Latin American country, will be the first country, and then the Artemis now to give this contribution in this program. So it's something was signed just to inform that Brazil is in the Artemis.
Great, thank you very much for that addition, Anna Cristina. Well, we have one question, and then we'll go to final wrap up. And maybe Jennifer, I'll start with you, but others feel free to jump in. You know, there's been a lot of talk about mega constellations or large constellations in low Earth orbit, and whether these are going to create excess debris. And I know you even mentioned EchoStar Hughes is doing some NGSO activity, and there's others. So where does this all sit? And it may even be brought up, I think it has been brought up within the ITU in different contexts as well, in terms of bringing to use requirements for mega constellations. What thoughts on mega constellations in the context of space debris and operations of others?
Sure. And in my view on space debris, it's not just mega constellations. There is a tremendous amount of activity. So I'm not picking on any mega constellations by any way. But I will just start by saying I was very disappointed in the Artemis Accord that the US entered into with the 6 other countries, and that there was no mention of space debris. That was a perfect opportunity. Today we have very little we do not have a domestic or international framework on space debris taking into account what I call new space, what the world looks like today. And, you know, the FCC has an open proceeding, they've adopted some rules, but the FCC is not the subject matter expert in the United States. We've seen other countries, you know, also with some dawdling. You know, I talked to the UK the other day. I know other countries are looking at it, but no one's really taken the lead here, which is very disappointing in my view. I really do believe there needs to be a global framework with rules, but rules that are flexible, that allow different technologies to be used, certainly set the standards. But if you don't do that, and you don't do that soon, I mean, there's no reason that astronauts going up to the space station should have to put on their spacesuits because of space debris. That's in a world with very little comparatively orbital debris than you will have in the future. You know, I have concerns. I'm not one who believes, well, you know, you give the small sats a little bit more flexibility because they're lower orbit. I think all of this, you need to really systematically sit down, and the countries of the world need to sit down and figure this out, and not at the ITU. I actually don't think that any of the current organizations are the right organizations, not even COPUOS and the UN bodies, because 95% of space traffic is commercial. And you can't have government bodies alone. I'm not saying it shouldn't be led by the governments and it shouldn't be a treaty organization, but you need to have the participation of the experts. The reason I don't think the ITU is the right area is it does not have the experts. It is not an expert agency. And the spectrum is so important that to take resources, scarce resources from one body, you know, one work and give it to another would be a mistake. So not that I have very strong views on that, but just a few thoughts.
I think I may have read an op-ed by you recently on it. I'm in the Space News, yes. So thank you for that. Well, let's go ahead and turn to final remarks and give each of our panelists just 1 minute. If you want to comment on the space debris question, Maureen's already commented, Jennifer's already commented, that would be fine. But also maybe just what you think is needed or is to come in the next 3 to 5 years, either in terms of domestic regulation of satellite space activity, or on the commercial side. So, one thing you'd like to see, or you expect to see, even if you wouldn't like to see it, when it comes to either regulation internationally or domestically, or just in terms of commercial development. Why don't we go ahead and just go in the order we went in. Joao, why don't you lead us off there, and we'll turn to Carlos next.
And just saying a bit my view or concern about the mega constellations. I really we need a framework for regulatory framework to do that, because if you think about these constellations, thinking a mega constellation will take a given orbit the whole globe, right? So it may come up with a situation whereby low of orbit altitudes maybe become even more scarce than geo orbits, which has been a problem in the past. So it's something that it's urgent and needs to be addressed by the international entities.
Great, thank you. Carlos, final thought, either on space debris or just something you would like to see or don't want to see, but you think is going to happen on the domestic or international regulatory side.
Well, what we've seen from this conference, is that there are several aspects on satellite space. You have the space debris, you have commercial, you have frequencies. So I believe everybody should have a more holistic view of the issues, and it doesn't mean to merge everything in one, but whomever participates in these activities should consider there is a frequency, there's a commercial, and then there's also a peaceful use of space as well as debris. So that's what I would like to see. Authorities and companies and individuals thinking about all the aspects together, and not only one of them, because they will all play an important role in the near future.
Great. Jennifer, final thought. I know you've spoken to space debris, but anything you would like to see in the next 3 to 5 years, particularly in the Latin America region, or expect to see, but not necessarily wouldn't like?
Sure. I think one of my concerns has always been that people treat space differently. At the end, and there are some differences, but when you come to the regulatory and the licensing and that, I think what access to spectrum and all of that space is part of the solution. And and there should be a view towards technology neutrality. And when I say technology neutrality, that doesn't mean equality, but it's certainly part of the solution. And we'd like to see regulators treat it as that and move away from what I see are a number of biased regulations towards either fiber or terrestrial mobile wireless. So thank you.
You bet. No, that's an interesting combination with you and Carlos. Carlos really holistically on the space regulation, and then you even more holistically technology neutral when we bring into the other mediums. Yeah. Anna Christina, final thought. Something you'd like to see maybe come out of Copious in the next 3 to 5 years that would be of interest to Latin American countries.
Yes, it was, as I already explained it, is this forum works as in a consensus way. It's very difficult to read this, or we need now for the time now a new the update the Outer Space Treaty for these new actors, that more the private companies now is growing because the Outer Space Treaty was approved a long time ago, that only the government has these activities, but now the new actors is coming. So, but to has this update in Outer Space Treaty or the regulations will be almost impossible, or maybe one day, but the solution for now is that national space legislations, like let's go to take an issue of the space debris, try to adopt the UN space guidelines that for now, in the international level, there is not a regulation. It's that countries can adopt or not adopt. But the moment that national legislation adopt this UN space debris guidelines, then become a role for the countries to follow the UN space debris guidelines. And there is a huge contribution also for the sustainability of the outer space. So for me, as now it's very difficult to reach this update in the international level, that makes more national space legislation for let's go, I pick up for space debris, that is a huge topic, very delicate for the sustainability of the outer space, that national level, this can be adopted. Most of the issues in outer space can be also the solution if national space legislation adopt regulations about this. Of course, respect the outer space treaty. We have respect the international level regulation, for law, and applying for the national law. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's an incredibly important point, really focusing on national implementation of some of these international guidelines. Well, Maureen, we're going to turn to you. We're actually at the hour, so maybe just 30 seconds, a quick reflection from you. What would you like to see come out of UN COPUOS if you had to pick one thing here in the next 3 to 5 years to come out of the UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space?
Okay, guidelines, but should be not binding, they should be adopted by consensus, and that's quite different. Of course, the question of large constellations brought up recently is topping the agendas. And as you were all speaking, I jotted down an impression I get, and it is that it's rather discouraging for the international community to find itself immersed in this terrible dilemma and questions of magnitude. I see the possibility of a code of conduct perhaps more feasible. And then perhaps time those that code of conduct will slowly grow into the rules of customary law.
Well, thank you.
I'm quite happy that the attempt speaks of an obligation of signatory states to take care and avoid and remove by limit the presence of dangerous space debris in the different areas.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you, Anna Cristina. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Joao. This has been a fantastic panel. As you can tell, we could sit here all afternoon, but Maureen's example of the pasta probably left some of our attendees hungry and us getting hungry for lunch as well too. But I really do appreciate your participation. This has been a fantastic panel. What a tremendous amount of expertise and experience is gathered here in this Zoom room, and hate to almost end it because of that. But thank you so much again. And for those of you listening in, be sure to start following on Twitter. There's a new Twitter account for the ASIL Space Law Interest Group at ASIL_SLIG. And once again, thank you, panel. Tremendous.